spending a lot of time building something yourself versus just pay 25 bucks a month.
Do you think a non-programmer would be able to work with that?
I should get the biggest hard drive from your electronic supplier. And then suddenly you have 5 terabytes hard drive and only 100 megabytes is used.
When does it make sense to develop your own solution?
Some vendors, they know that the data is the most valuable thing you have.
Situations where you would say, no, it makes total sense to develop your own solution.
It worked well in that case. Too well.
How much more effort?
Oh,
would it
that's
be?
a fantastic thought experiment, actually.
Welcome to our podcast for entrepreneurs, masterful.info. Today we are going to talk about the topic of buying versus developing. For example, if you have a problem in your company and you want to decide if you want to buy a software that already exists or if you want to solve it yourself, create an individual software for that. Especially in SaaS companies like software as a service companies, if they have developers, the first thing they consider is to develop their own solution because it looks like it's not much effort. But yeah, Chris and me, we have experienced that over and over that it cost a lot of money and risks. And especially Chris, from his IT perspective, he saw many big issues caused by the wrong decision. So, Chris, um, why is it an important question, and which kind of like situations and people is it relevant?
This is a good question. Actually, it's relevant to, I would argue, to all of different sizes of companies. Usually, so we talk about startups here. So it's really interesting for the decision maker, usually the CEO, to come up with a decision like, do I need to hire people to build a solution, or can I go somewhere to a market and find a solution fitting my problem I want to solve or the process I want to implement? But this is not necessarily restricted to startup founders. It can also be relevant to scale up companies or like bigger companies. It really depends on a few different things we can talk about today.
Yeah, and also even for smallest companies, it can be relevant. For example, the decision if you want to manage your invoices or especially like tasks with some spreadsheet or to choose a software that is made for just for this purpose. Many of us use WordPress, and there is always the decision to create a certain feature yourself or like with the developer or to choose a plugin. So it's basically relevant for almost all businesses. When does it make sense to develop your own solution?
Oh, that's actually a good point. When and what? It's quite interesting to think about what you actually want to implement. Let's go back to the WordPress example you brought up. If it makes sense to use a plugin or develop something yourself. So if you're not sure like where the journey of your company is heading towards, you definitely should consider buying because you otherwise gonna leave so much time. You're gonna waste so much time and leave so much money on the wrong end to find like to build your proper solution to come to do all the mistakes others already done for you. So it's the best. Go to somewhere, go like get a plugin to whatever you, because WordPress, again, good example. There are so many plugins. There's definitely whatever you want to do, there's a plugin for it. So you don't need to think in the beginning like, okay, should I develop my own little feature here? Should I build my own contact form? No, there are thousands of plugins helping you building your own contact form on WordPress. So this is really one thing you need to think about, like, because you save so much time by just go and find some plugin, buy some solution instead of planning it, developing it, hiring the right people before that, and then also making sure like is it the thing I really what the market wants from my business, or is like do requirements change again? Again, it's a time thing. So if time is your biggest constraint and also budget, build.
So if time is your biggest constraint, so you suggest
To buy.
to buy. Yes, yes, yes. So in most, yeah, in many cases, I guess, especially for startups where there is a lot of insecurity about the future, like which direction it will go, it makes more sense to buy a already ready solution, especially with the time as a very important factor for startups. Startups needs to develop their idea very fast because first of all the opportunity goes away pretty fast, and also there is a lot of costs involved. Even if you don't have many employees, just your time is worth a lot of money, because you could also work as an employee and earn like $60,000 a year or something, or maybe 2-3 times more of that. So you don't want to be in the developing phase of a startup for too long. You want to launch as soon as possible and to get insights from the clients how well they perceive your business idea.
Right, that's the point.
And is there situations where you would say no, it makes total sense to develop your own solution, even like for startups?
This again really depends. So maybe it's not necessary to build like a whole company from scratch. I mean, you can think of having different layers. Like, let's say you want to build a website. You still can use WordPress, but you can also try to think, okay, I want to make like the look and feel really custom because I have a certain idea. I want to convey a certain feeling, whatever, with my website. So you could also think about like, okay, let's hire someone who builds us like a good looking theme the way I want it to be. Like, let's say you're a company, you hired a designer, and he came up with a really brilliant idea how to convey your services, how to convey the information you have on your website. Still, you do not need to build like all the whole website thing yourself. You can go in there like saying, okay, I got the design. We already know how websites are supposed to look like every different page on your website. And then you can hire someone building a theme for you, and the rest can still be WordPress. So you can still benefit from the buying decision, like getting a plugin, which is then integrating again, circling back to the contact form. You have the contact form; it's within the theme of your website, and still you don't need to build everything yourself again. So this is one thing. What I mean by saying there are different layers with build versus buy decisions you can make.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. So there is not only black and white, but there is kind of a in the middle gray area. Instead of just creating something from scratch, you can also combine something that is already created. There are also like many open source solutions,
Right.
many templates for all kinds of programming languages and like WordPress and platforms. And then you can just adjust it, which will save you a lot of time and money. You have been working with many startups. You have been consulting them and like working as an interim CTO with many different IT startups, especially. Do you have some highlights of where the decision was made in the right way, in the wrong way, and which implications it had?
Yeah, this is a good point. Many companies, startups, you said, yeah, mostly working with startups and also scale ups. So there's no clear right or wrong. There's something in between sometimes. So for instance, recently one of my clients, we wanted to test one particular marketing idea, collecting some input through Typeform in that case from our customers. We were thinking of running a marketing campaign, and as like a thank you, like a gift for participating in the survey, we wanted to give them like a discounted product in that case. So in the beginning,
So Typeform is like a form where people can fill out. It's like Google Forms, but maybe with a little bit more features. Is it correct?
yeah, good point that you mentioned it. Google Forms, this is right, easygoing. You can set up like a form where you can ask certain information, and then eventually it will end up in like a spreadsheet. Typeform is kind of Google Forms but on steroids. You can have like nested questions. Like let's say you have the one part of your form is asking you in a certain direction, so that in the next page you would like have a different set depending on what was the answer on the first page. And this is like a heavy tool. It's really good. You can really customize it. It looks beautifully on different devices. So it's also targeted and tailored for mobile devices, which majority of the people nowadays, they are using mobile devices. So yeah, that's Typeform. This is one thing where what we used in that case to ask the people for feedback. Coming back to what we actually built. So the idea was to collect information like feedback using Typeform from the customers, and then give them like a discount on certain products we wanted to sell to them. The shop in that case is built on Shopify, which is again a good decision. Coming to the question of build versus buy, I always recommend startups, especially in the e-commerce realm, to go to Shopify. But yeah, that's one thing we can also discuss in more detail later. So the idea here was Typeform, Shopify, and we wanted to connect it. And there comes a third tool I really like to use. It's called Zapier. Some of you might already know it. It's a good tool to automate certain workflows. You can, for instance, send you a Slack message whenever you get an email from a certain customer, or you can also set up some automated flow, like someone left you a message on your contact form, and then this will trigger another thing. So you can basically connect everything. Like they have 6,000 applications you can connect. Zapier, really great. You do not need any coding experience whatsoever. Again, this is a build versus buy decision, which is you still build something, but you also buy something. In that case, so Zapier is like allows you to build simple workflows from one system to another. In that case, Typeform to Shopify. But you do not really need to build like all the nitty gritty low level things. You just connect the output from Typeform and connect it to the input from Shopify.
So what was your like learning from this feature, from implementing this Typeform?
Again, Zapier makes a great job, does a great job in connecting those systems. And we used it for the first couple of days until we decided to ramp up the marketing campaign. And here's another thing you need to consider when you're using Zapier. So every action you are taking on Zapier costs you a so-called task. And every action in your automated workflow, it's called Zap. So every time you connect the system, Typeform, Shopify, you set up a Zap. You have certain tasks, they happen in there. Like, okay, this is the product. This is like the email address. I need to match the product coming from Shopify, like the answer with the actual product. And then you have a few tasks. They happen again when the Zap gets executed. So Zapier is limited. You have different plans. You can like, the starter plan is like 750 tasks you can execute each month. And suddenly, after a few days, we noticed, oh, nothing is working on Zapier anymore because we used up all the tasks and all the additional tasks they would allow you for an additional price to use. So we clearly understood like Zapier is great to prototype things or like automate away low traffic workflows, like things that would only happen like a few times a week. But this case, we were sending hundreds of people to Typeform, and this would cause like hundreds of tasks being burned every day. So we were leaning quite quickly into the direction Zapier was great to connect those two systems. No, we need to go to a different place where we again have a build versus buy decision. In this case, we knew how Typeform would work, what data we wanted to collect. So the marketing team had a few ideas. They did some changes on their own. They could use Zapier because, again, you do not need to know how to code. You can just go there and connect things, drag and drop, and it will work. But yeah, again, this is good for prototyping. It worked well in that case. Too well. We had lots of traffic, but then we quickly decided, okay, we already know the flow. We already know what data to collect. Now we need to go in the direction of how can we actually scale up better. And in that case, we implemented actually what was happening on Zapier on Cloudflare Worker, which is a serverless provider. So for those who don't know, serverless provider, this is quite a recent trend, I would argue. It's like a few years old now. It's you go to, in that case, Cloudflare, and you have like one part of code. You want to go to Cloudflare and say like, hey, there's one URL which only does these 20 lines of code, nothing else. Cloudflare would then take care of scaling it up, scaling it down, automatically distributing traffic and whatnot. So it's taking care of all the infrastructure concerns, and also all, like, you don't need to rent any server, you don't need to pay anything upfront. You just pay how many requests or traffic you had on this one function. In that case, like those 20 lines of code. In this case, it really helped us because Cloudflare, it has a huge free tier. So every 24 hours, you can do 100,000 requests, which is for free again. And they would take care of load balancing traffic, making sure that it would be as close as possible to the customer. So it would really work well.
That sounds like actually pretty complicated. Do you think a non-programmer would be able to work with
this?
That?
This is a really good question. No. That's the short answer. Because you need to know, in that case, you need to know how to write JavaScript. And again, you could hire someone who knows JavaScript in that case and help you implement that one process to build it yourself. But you're buying all the other things from Cloudflare. Like I said, the infrastructure, the hosting, like you don't need to take care of upgrading servers, making sure that things are working and whatnot. So this is again like one of this layered, the layered cake of build versus buy decisions you can take. And yeah, it's a trade-off.
On the one hand, to buy, pure buy is the Typeform with Zapier combination. Well, although it's also not pure completed solution, it's you have to do a little bit. So we are like on a scale. But then in the middle somewhere, there is this solution with Cloudflare, and the extreme solution on build, you would build like the whole form into the website, and then like program, and it would be like how much more effort.
Oh, that's a fantastic thought experiment, actually. This is a really good point. Let's say we want to build like everything ourselves. We want to have that form, we want to have the clue in between. For sake of simplicity, we still use Shopify, but still, let's say we want to build this one form and we want to connect it to Shopify. So we would need to hire someone who's building the front end. It can be a designer in that case who's setting up the layout and make sure that the form is done properly. Because on Typeform, you have like a neat editor. You have like really on Google Forms or like a Word document, or some of you might also be familiar with Canva. You can track around like a layout, and then you can say like, this is my form, this is my multiple choice questions and whatnot. So the designer needs to think about, okay, the layout, the structuring, everything. The front-end developer, they need to think about the technical, how should I do it in HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all those languages used in the front end. And then this is one part. Then the another part is like, okay, there needs to be like some backend component to it. Where do I collect all the responses? How do I connect to Shopify? Can I make sure that whenever Shopify is right now busy, what might happen, this is also quite interesting topic on its own, that whenever you're communicating to a different third-party service, there might be like some issues, and then you can retry again certain things without telling your end user like, oh, something's wrong, please come back and maybe tomorrow. But you can also certain things retry automatically. Like sometimes it's just some network issue, and then you can try it again in a few seconds, and then it will work again. So you need to think about this as well. And then storing the data and making sure that your Typeform, the form you build is hosted properly so that it's up and running. So if you really want to make sure that it's 24 up and running, you need to have someone on call who gets alerted when it's not running, because you by accident send too many people to your form and you only booked like a small server from your hosting provider, and it cannot really handle the millions of customers facing your form. And you don't have to think about all of this using Typeform. You just go there, you set up your questions, and you hand off and let them do the heavy lifting.
Yeah, it's for a decision maker who is not a developer, it seems like a simple thing just to implement some contact form, and people, like, the data will magically appear like on spreadsheet or something. But the reality is there are so many moving parts, and you have to take care of all of them. And also many of those things that have to be completed require different types of experts, which makes it even more complicated because there is also like a human part. Maybe your designer is amazing, maybe your front end designer is also really good, but then who is doing the next is not so good, or the database expert or the surfer expert. And it's like a cart house. You can build 90% of perfect soft solution, but then for example, something very essential like a surfer, you choose the wrong surfer and no use of all this perfect what you have developed. What is the other extreme? Would you be able, like, just to buy a complete solution that is already out there for in this case?
That's the other extreme on the scale from build to buy. Probably not, because there's no tool that's called questionnaire to shopifyorder.com, right? I mean, we could probably build that company, but who's gonna use it?
Maybe a plugin.
Maybe a plugin. Yeah, maybe a plugin for Shopify. That could also be one idea. It depends on who's gonna think about the questionnaire, for instance. In that case, Typeform allows like a non-technical person to build this whole form. That person doesn't need to go to Shopify, which you might have like a separation of concerns. Like, why should the marketing team play around on some plugins on Shopify? So this is maybe also one thing you can think about, like, do I really want to have the intern working on my mission critical component? So this would allow someone to set up from marketing a few first forms so that they can start collecting some ideas and some information and some learnings, and then they could eventually hook it up with maybe someone from a Shopify team in your company to connect it using Zapier, which is not requiring any tech resources.
So we assumed, like in this example, that we have a team, a small team, like of who can support us. But imagine if you are a solopreneur and don't know much about developing. So for you, it's probably even easier to make a decision versus buy and develop, because it's much more difficult to develop your own solution. But in the same time, you could always hire a freelancer on Upwork or even Fiverr, and you could adjust certain things. You could also like hire someone who consults you and who gives you the best plan to execute your solution. If you are just starting and have a limited budget, you could always use some platforms like Shopify or WordPress and just choose the right plugin for your approach. And sometimes it's not very individual. Usually there are so many similar businesses out there. So many people already thought about similar thing. And even if it's 90% what you want, it's probably okay. It will not break your business idea just because you didn't had certain small details. There is always a choice, but if you start within a platform, you have like more options to just put some puzzle together, like plugins and templates, and you make your life easier. On the other hand, I've heard so many times problems with all those plugins, especially like WordPress. They are famous for, uh, yeah, there is. It's not very strict. Everyone can publish, or many people like can publish WordPress plugins, and they oftentimes, not oftentimes, but from all those millions of plugins, there is a big portion that is not very safe, makes your website very slow, and so on. So, yeah, how do you choose the right solution?
Again, good question. Um, like you said on WordPress, there are many plugins. There's this marketplace, which is well governed by users, right? They people can build plugins, they can upload them, and then people can find for their solution or for their idea, and there's a plugin, and then they could see like if there's a good rating, they could see if there's a bad rating. That could also happen, but sometimes it's a new plugin or the people who rated that plugin to be really good, they didn't have the issues you had. Let's say you mentioned a good example, like you can get lots of plugins, you can stuff it in your WordPress, and then you can like every idea you have on your mind, you can go to plugin search and install it, and then suddenly your website gets slower and slower, and this is only one risk you might face. Another risk could be like some of the plugins, they were built once because they were solving one particular problem in one WordPress installation, and that guy who built it was like, hey, that's a great idea, I'm gonna share this with the world, I'm gonna upload it to the WordPress marketplace. But then that person is no longer maintaining it. is that person might no longer be interested, or maybe they are working in a restaurant. No, they are not really interested in working with WordPress at all anymore. And then there's one plugin that has been built many years ago, and no one is really maintaining it in terms of security updates. Maybe there's like one little bug which could be exploited to hack your website. This could be a risk. Or like one little thing which is no longer compatible with newer versions of WordPress. Or maybe there's one little thing which is acting up with a different plugin. That might also happen. So to circle back to should I really go and should I really get lots of plugins and stuff them in my WordPress? I think we could go.
Yeah, especially if you don't have many other options. So, how to avoid those problems, even with choosing plugins?
It really depends what your goal is, right? If you want to validate some idea you have, maybe it's a good idea to use a plugin in the beginning, and just to build a
Mhm.
prototype and see, okay, this is going in the right direction. It looks ugly. It is quite slow. It's not a quite nice user experience, but I'm already collecting meaningful data because I see people are desperate for the solution I built here, and they are okay with it that a page is loading like 5 seconds. They still want to have the service or the information shown on the website or whatever they can do with the website. So this is good in the beginning to prototype, but then at some point you should consider like, okay, what's the result? Is it great? Okay, maybe now I see I oh this what I my Frankenstein website, it made me $1,000 in a week. It's a good time to maybe hire someone and maybe now think of like a custom plugin which is ironing out all the wrinkles. Or if the result is like, nah, it didn't work at all, you can still remove the plugins. Like, okay, you used this one plugin for one thing on your WordPress website. I don't need it anymore. At least deactivate it so it's not becoming a ticking time bomb in the future.
Especially if entrepreneurs with limited resources, they try to find free plugins and free solutions, but they have to be aware of the limitations. No one is going to invest, like pay a whole team of developers just to make you an amazing
Yeah.
plugin or amazing solution because of such a huge choice. If you any feature you have in your mind, usually there are like hundreds of different plugins. There is this like idea, okay, why should I pay if there is a free solution? But on the other hand, maybe this solution is not maintained
Yeah.
anymore. Yeah, you have to do some research. And oftentimes, the paid solution, the professional solution, there is a whole team behind it. It will always be up to date, and it also sustainable. Maybe you will find an amazing plugin that is for free at the moment, but this person cannot sustain this to update all the time. Maybe it will, like Chris said, go to do something else, work something in some other company or something, and will not have time to maintain on this on up to date. So it's better also sometimes to invest. Even like sometimes it feels like it's a lot of money, 20 euro, 50 euro or dollars. But if you think about how much money it would cost you to develop it, then this is just peanuts.
Right.
Peanuts.
This is a really good point. So point number one, what about the free plugins out there? There's a famous saying, there's no free lunch. So people build something, maybe they have a business model where they try to upsell you something, or maybe they have some malicious intent to invade thousands of websites. Well, this is far-fetched, but might happen. This is a classic supply chain risk you have to mitigate. You really need to check, like, okay, why would someone spend so much time building this? How many people are behind this? This is really classic. You need to risk assess the vendors you're dealing with and you're building a relationship with. You need to check, like, how many people are working there. If it's already a company, maybe is it a profitable company? Are they gonna be around when I'm growing? Can they actually grow with me? So there's quite an interesting aspect to this as well. And like you said, it's better to go with someone who charges you, because then you know, okay, they want to make a living from it, which means they want to be around, hopefully for eternity. Nothing is eternal, but still, they want to be around in like 10 years, 15 years, 30 years. So it's always good to think of these like options. And then the last option you said, like spending a lot of time building something yourself versus just pay 25 bucks a month for that plugin. This is also a really important decision, not just in terms of money, because if you build something yourself, you also need to plan. You need to think of all the processes you want to implement with whatever you want to build, your own solution. And you also need to think of the unhappy path. This is also one one interesting aspect. Lots of our clients, we see it in online marketing as well as in IT. Lots of clients, they always picture the perfect journey. Like they would go, everyone would go the same way, and but that's not the case. There might be like some issue. Let's say someone wants to buy a product. Sure, they put it in the checkout process. No, they type in their credit card information, and then, oh, the credit card is expired. That's an unhappy path. Or the credit card is stolen. That's also an unhappy path. So you need to think of all these things when you're designing your own solution, depending on what you want to implement. And then you need to build it, which also takes time and money. Then you have your own built solution. And where are you now? 6 months in, spent like 20K US on your own solution instead of paying $25 a month. And you could have started like 6 months ago.
Yeah, it's also all about what is your main value and what is your main strength. If this company, for example, this translation company who offers like your website in different languages, there have been doing like for the last 5 years maybe only that. They are very specialized, they are very passionate about languages, they have the whole team surrounded only this topic. And then you come across and wants to do it on like on a side, just as a side project. Yeah. You can imagine that you have a huge disadvantage in that. And also people might be concerned, like entrepreneurs, about unique like value they are bringing, especially if you are thinking about investors. If you put all existing software together and just offer some like something to sell, to buy, then they might think, okay, for investors it looks like there is nothing unique, you don't get like investors money. But it's not always the case. I think in majority of the cases investors want to pay for users that are using your program.
Yeah.
For example, Twitter is not a very complicated program to build. It costed not like this so many billions of dollars, not because of the software. It is because of the millions, hundreds of millions users it has been like using.
Absolutely, I agree with that. This is really one thing, quite interesting aspect actually. Look, coming from that angle, where's actually your value proposition? Like, what are you actually building?
Yeah.
And it's not the technology in most of the cases. Sure, sometimes in niche cases it might be the technology you're developing, but usually all businesses are facing the same challenges, but in a different color maybe. So yeah, this is really one thing you need to think: where's actually the value coming? Like you already mentioned it, users. So let's say go back to e-commerce. You have customers, you had customers in the past, and your value add is maybe to identify what customers are interested in what products, and then optimizing your supply chain and sourcing, like how can I get the best products for how can I get the best prices for the products I'm buying, which my customers are actually interested in. This is not necessarily connected to your e-commerce platform. You can still sell your products on Shopify. There's more the question like, okay, what tools can I use? What might I need to build to identify those patterns, and then like also doing the creative laborious task of sourcing products and thinking of, okay, what could be the next trend? This is then for some companies it's more relevant, like how are they actually, what's the really core business? Is it to build their own Shopify clone? Is it like their own reporting tool? Clearly not. These are tools they can buy somewhere and can make use of it, and then the information they are deriving from those tools, they can use it to enable to offer better product to their customers. So this is an important point, because you said it, X, formerly known as Twitter, it's a social media platform. This is a solved problem, and there are a few out there. So the value is not really coming from the technology itself. The value is coming from what are the users doing, are they engaging, and then obviously the ads being sold on those platforms. Relationships to like those publishers or like the advertisers. This is more important than really nice timeline.
So in general, we tend to advise to buy instead of build. In certain cases, it makes more sense to build. Especially for startups, it makes total sense to buy in the beginning. Imagine we bought, or the client bought, is using a software that is already out there. And is there a time when it makes sense to change, to switch to own solution? And what should you consider when doing that?
I think it's more for the companies in the scale up phase or even beyond. If they're already established, let's go back to that. Where's actually my value add coming from? Let's say they succeeded in identifying good patterns in products, what my customers want to buy next month. And now they are quite big and they know like, okay, we are always going in the same direction with the reporting tool. We are always going in the same direction with picking and packing and yeah, you name it, like e-commerce. It really depends now what you want to do. I mean, sometimes you can ask the question, should we build something because we identify a supply chain risk as in let's say the reporting tool. Reporting tool, great. But there's rumors that the company providing that tool might go out of business because the VC market has tanked. They spent lots of money on developing it and marketing it, and now they realize, oh, it's still not profitable, and they don't get it to become profitable. So you clearly have now on your risk assessment one huge risk. That one supplier of a tool I'm using and my decision making is depending on might not be there by the end of the year. So this might be one thing you definitely should watch out for, and then start asking yourself, okay, we have this one tool. We know what information we are getting out of it. We also understand quite fairly how this information is being generated. Maybe we can go now, set some money aside and build our own tool. So then again, you go back to this phase I explained earlier, like coming up with a plan. What do we want to build? What do you want to achieve? And what people you need to hire to build this. Maybe there's some agency assisting you, which helps you cutting out some issues like hiring the right people and whatnot. So this might be one case you can clearly go and venture into that direction. Build versus buy. First we bought it. No, we need to build it because we identified some issues. Another good point could be the verticalization of your business, which is quite a thing with really good, great and large manufacturing companies such as, let's say, Procter & Gamble. Maybe I've never worked with them, but at some point they identify things they always need on a recurring basis. Let's say they want to put the Pringles in the can. Maybe many years ago they had one supplier of that can, and at some point they're like, maybe we know how many cans we need each year and what we're gonna need next year. Maybe it makes sense to look into manufacturing those cans ourselves and save us maybe 30%, which might be huge if you're selling those products the most. So this is also one consideration where you see, okay, I using the same thing over and over and over again, and I'm not really changing it anymore because this is the optimal path for my business. That you could start looking into what supplier could be replaced by an in-house solution. But then you have the in-house solution maintenance problem. You build something, now you need to take care of sourcing all the materials for your Pringles can and making sure the conveyor belts and machines are producing it properly, and you have the quality insurance and whatnot. The same could be applied to whatever you're building, which is interfacing with Shopify, like the reporting tool. Now you have a tool you need to host and make sure that it is working and it's fairly up to date and it's still working with Shopify in 3 years. So yeah, it's a trade-off.
Would you say like that most successful companies with biggest growth rate were more like specialized on a small niche and very, very focused, compared like if you are broad and try to cover many aspects of your supply chain? And I'm talking more about online business. Do you think they have like better chances, or yeah, in general, and from all those markets, from all those companies, it's you have usually better chances of success if you are specialized compared like if you try to build in a wide range of services?
Ooh, that's a good question, actually. I mean, if you have really one idea you want to market or build a product and market, and you do your research and you just cannot find the perfect fit, or like you just don't find anything at all, and you're like, okay, this might be a new thing I'm building.
I think a good example for that is AWS.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, AWS, this is quite interesting case since
Explain what it is.
that's a good point. So AWS stands for Amazon Web Services, which is the hosting company owned by Amazon.
And it's so hugely successful. It's incredible. It earns now more than Amazon itself, Amazon market platform.
Right. It's the cash cow of Amazon. It's producing profits and it's insane. So almost every company is using AWS to some extent, directly or indirectly. Yeah, going back, AWS is a hosting provider which had the idea to commoditize and like generalize certain things. Like in the beginning, they had one service. It was the message queue, and they had one goal. They wanted to achieve like you have a queue you can send a message to, and there's some service you build which can receive messages, and you do not need to take care of infrastructure. Amazon or AWS makes sure that it's working, it's scaling, and you don't need to think of all of this. The next service they provided was Amazon S3. That's the storage solution, which is like a almost infinitely large hard drive on the cloud where you can upload files to. And again, you don't need to think of scaling. It just works. It's almost always up and running. And no matter how many requests you have, you just pay for how many files you served and how many files you stored. So no thinking and considering of storage and planning ahead. So that was the short tension on AWS.
So I guess they needed, or they were using a lot of hosting themselves, and they realized that they like, okay, maybe I'm not sure when they started using like their own servers and hosting. And
I think quite early. So because the story that was like this, I'm not 100% sure if it's really a fact, but the rumor or the story going around on about AWS is they had like a huge data centers, because back then there was no cloud provider. There was maybe some virtual private service hosting. But if you want to build a serious business, you needed to go to a data center, rent some space. You needed to buy servers. You needed to set them up. You needed to like spend lots of money. And they envisioned like, oh, we should change this mindset to something where you do not need to plan ahead, but you can like use resources on demand. And how AWS started was they had spare capacity, because this is one thing, if you really do not know how your business is going to grow, in what direction, and what you actually need to run your business, you tend to over provision. So you buy more servers than you actually need. It's the typical case of, I need to store my files somewhere. I should get the biggest hard drive from your electronic supplier. And then suddenly you have 5 terabytes hard drive and only 100 megabytes is used. What to do with the rest? And AWS came up with the idea of like, okay, we can give it to third party, and we can make it more accessible for them and change the paradigm to just use what you actually want to use.
Yeah, for businesses during Christmas times, the like number of visitors skyrockets, and then in January
Right.
it slows down. So it makes sense for clients of AWS. But to use AWS as a user case, as an example, first of all, Amazon had enough funds to do that. They had investors. And second of all, there was not a satisfying solution. So for them, for Amazon decided not to buy, but to build their own hosting, because they could also like get some servers or go to hosting companies, to big hosting companies. But I guess also in this time, Amazon was already pretty successful. And Amazon saw hosting as a strategical advantage against competition. If they continued using Amazon's other servers, they would have such high costs and maybe not reliability. So the same is like for Google. For them, hosting was central part of their business. So that's a good, valuable lesson for our listeners.
Oh yeah, that's actually a good point. At some point, I mean, AWS is a good example. I think it was Netflix or some other company who got so big, and they were using AWS in the beginning to gain like an advantage, to go to a market first and build their success. But at some point, they were a bit too successful in terms of hosting cost, because of course Amazon wants to make money from offering the services, so they have a premium on top of what they actually spend. So I think, yeah, must have been Netflix. They at some point they decided like, oh, the really most expensive parts, we need to build our own data center again, and because they understood at some point what they actually need and what's the requirement and what's the growth rate. And like you said, the good example of there's lots of traffic in December for Christmas, and then the rest of the year is like silence. This is like an unpredictable thing. Definitely startups could experience and oftentimes experience when suddenly, like, let's say a product or some marketing campaign goes viral, and then you suddenly have like an unpredicted workload, and you might go down if you have like only provision for your usual regular workload. So that's why those companies go to the cloud. But at some point, when you know what your requirements are in that terms, you can go out again, which might not be easy in all cases because there's always a caveat. So AWS, if you send data to AWS and you migrate to them, it's sending in the data is free. If you want to get the data out, you start and maybe you build up over time because you have been with AWS for 10 years. Then you might collect lots of data. At some point, you need to get the data out again. And AWS is really expensive if you want to get the data out. So this is an effect called the vendor lock-in, which you always should keep in mind if you're assessing, again, the vendors in your build versus buy decision making. What's my exit strategy? Should I, or is there any way to get to a different vendor, or can I do it on my own again? Because they are now possessing the data, and we talked about what is actually the intellectual property I'm building. Is it the tech or is it the data I'm collecting? In most cases, it's the data. And some vendors, they know that the data is the most valuable thing you have. And this is a good way to blackmail to stay their customer.
So for customers or for entrepreneurs, the lesson is the following. If it doesn't exist, the solution you need, and if it's very central to your strategy and you have the resources, you can build it. But in most cases, so many things are already invented and they are specialized companies, and it's difficult to compete with them just as a side project. So like Netflix, you can become bigger, and you, while doing in the beginning, like in the first few years, you can use an existing solution like AWS. And then as soon as you recognize that now you have the capacity and now it makes more sense, then you can switch to your own solution and like create your own software, for example. So yeah, it was a very insightful interview, podcast episode. And I think our audience learned a lot. To you, our audience, if you have some like open questions, or you are not sure in certain aspects of your business whether you should buy or build, please send us an email or just comment on this podcast, and we will try to answer as soon as possible. Also, if you need some consultancy or implementation, you can also always contact us at masterful.info. Thank you very much. Chris, do you want to say something? Or
when in doubt, buy. That's what I can recommend everyone. Great episode. I hope you enjoyed our conversation we had on this topic, and like Will already said, leave a comment. Drop us an email if you have any question or recommendation, suggestion, or any feedback of any sorts. And like you said, we are also available for consultation, so don't hesitate to reach out to us because this is our daily bread and butter. Okay. Bye, guys.